After several years of taking comic lettering requests from followers, I present to you the single most intriguing comment we have ever received on our channel. How would you letter for, say, an evil business vampire? Evil business vampire. 3 deceptively simple words that combine and instantly spark the imagination. Every time I read them, my mind conjures rich characters and settings and stories. And as I started working on what I thought would be another 60 or so second tutorial, I realized that the range of possibilities couldn't be contained in my usual format. And as the video got longer and longer, I also realized that creating lettering for an evil business vampire would also give me the opportunity to redeem myself. Because after millions and millions of views on short-form videos, I realized that I've inadvertently been lying to you about comic lettering, about how to think about it, how to design it, and how it actually works in practice. But wait, you say, you're the only channel that actually explains lettering in a way that I understand. How have you been lying? Well, I didn't mean to. It was a surprise to me too. But here's what happened. In our shorts, we've explored such delightfully specific topics as a human becoming corrupted by the digital world, a character slowly drowning, a teeth-chattering skeleton, and both vomiting and belching. Most of my videos intentionally remove the artwork that would normally sit underneath the lettering. My goal was to bring visibility to one of the most invisible comic arts, forcing you to focus on the pure graphic design of shapes, lines, and typography. To keep viewers engaged inside this minimalist canvas, I go wild with details. Unfortunately, I've accidentally tricked a lot of people into thinking that the storytelling burden falls entirely on lettering. Some of my lettering is so detailed that people actually forget that comics have, well, art. The bubbly foam surrounding the drowning balloons could instead be enveloping a character's face in a raging river. The digital glitches could be drawn into the character's body instead of the typography. The lettering I create is often the most extreme version possible, not necessarily intended for panel-by-panel use, but an expression of lettering at its most artistically unburdened. Ever see a photo from an avant-garde fashion show? Or seen footage of an outlandish concept car? Look in the comments and you'll always see the same complaints. No one would actually wear that, or that's so impractical. But experimental runway outfits and one-off cars are not intended for mass production or public consumption. They're expressions of an artistic vision with no limitation, a demonstration of possible design cues that could be extracted and simplified for products you'd actually want to wear and drive. But the designer has to push boundaries to unlock possibilities. It's a design method I call speculative maximalism, and it's a 2-step process. Step 1, create the craziest, most uninhibited version of the thing. Step 2, break that thing back down into simpler versions to build a range of design possibilities. Only problem? Our 60-second shorts only show you the first step. So for our evil business vampire, let's do the entire process. And what you'll see is that there's actually a lot of different but correct ways to create evil business vampire lettering, because we're building a design system and a range of options that work symbiotically with the actual comics artwork. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but lettering is the art of borrowing from shared iconography, which just means mining culture for imagery and symbols that we already understand. Need to letter someone cold? Icicles hanging from the bottom of the balloon do the trick. Is a character nauseated? Cartoons have spent a century establishing green circles as a shortcut for queasiness. But be cautious about your lettering encroaching on illustration. If you're lettering in a gray void, you might, for example, hear the word business and begin adorning a balloon with neckties. It's unexpected and certainly drives the comment section wild. On my most elaborate videos, some comments will gush, "I never knew comic lettering could be so detailed and complex." But neckties hanging like icicles from a word balloon aren't necessarily a shortcut for someone's manner of speech. Actually, if your business vampire is an elegant charmer with a smooth voice, then the goofiness of icicle neckties might completely fight your intention. But an elegant businessman wearing a necktie, that might actually be more telegraphic of a refined voice than the lettering itself. And that's exactly why I use the term symbiotic to describe the different parts of the comic creation process. Because a reader consumes the line art and the colors and the lettering all at once seamlessly, and each should complement the others in service of immersive storytelling. So before we design our evil business vampire lettering system, let's first meet our actual evil business vampire. Our modern perception of vampires is hugely influenced by the many adaptations of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which begins, appropriately, with a business transaction. We often forget that the classic tale follows Jonathan Harker on a trip to secure a real estate deal, seeking Count Dracula's signature on documents. In this way, Dracula himself is already an evil business vampire. Most of the depictions of Dracula in culture embody the vision of moneyed royalty during the Victorian era. Well-tailored suits, ties, fine fabrics, slicked hair, and manicured nails. Of course, you could probably draw a more modern businessman who hides his vampiric qualities, but the characters we create in our comics and on this channel tend to be more outlandish, fantastical, inspired by 19th and 20th century genre fiction rather than reality. And the first step to being a good comic creator is embracing what you love and working authentically to yourself. So when you ask Lydia and I to create an evil business vampire, you get someone gothic and poised, yet crazed and frightening, akin to Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee, with a hint of Matt Berry thrown in for good measure. Lydia's research into this era was impressive, and I love all the details she added that scream gothic opulence. A tie pin and cufflinks and a pocket watch chain. But perhaps the most impressive detail is the ivory penholder and vintage nib, which we can totally imagine being used to sign soul-binding contracts in blood. All of these details help me imagine his voice. I get the sense that he's charismatic, conniving, calculating, smooth, and not above a good joke. And now that we've met him, we know what he looks like, what his attitude is, and what his costuming conveys, and how we might letter his words. The best thing about lettering for a wealthy Victorian character is the sheer amount of visually compelling, totally iconic design fodder. Inspired by Jonathan Harker's fateful trip to Transylvania, I started researching contracts and documents from the late 1800s and early 1900s. What I discovered was an incredible blend of typographic styles. Elegant copperplate and Spencerian handwriting, black letter typefaces, fancy drop caps, and a crunched and crowded aesthetic, all on rich, luxurious paper that has yellowed and aged beautifully over time. I also fell in love with the wax seals and signatures at the bottom of contracts. The red wax seal has become so ubiquitous in fiction that we sometimes forget it was actually a real method of notarizing a document. So, with all that rich history in mind, let's follow the process of speculative maximalism and first create the most elaborate evil business vampire lettering we can. Obviously, the most important aspect of lettering is the actual typography, so I'd first like to find some typefaces that give me this beautiful retro script without having to write it out by hand every time. The first is Nautica Bold, which has an elegant, organic, flowing style and elaborate flourishes on the capitals. The other is Duende, which leans at a little more of an angle and has impressively sweeping descenders on lowercase letters like the G. Next, I want a classic black letter that isn't too overbearing or spiky. And the two fonts I found are Carol Gothic and Amador, which are similar, and you could probably blend them without 99% of people noticing. These black letter fonts are perfect as the base for an elaborate drop cap, so I'll use the pen and brush tools and a tapering line to create some comically fancy flourishes. Our vampire can open his dialogue with a pompous "magnificent," and then continue his dialogue in a script font, before switching back to a black letter for his final declaration. This layout actually mimics a real contract of the era, and so we can also begin using lines as a design element to separate sections. And just because I still don't think we've gone far enough, let's introduce a third typographic style. A great excuse to use this amazing weathered serif I discovered, with the poetic name I am Fel DW Pika SC. So romantic. It's fun to close our evil business vampires monologue with the style of fine print at the end of a contract. But it doesn't have to be boring. In fact, we can mix uppercase and lowercase to create some additional visual appeal. And of course, our evil business vampire doesn't end a speech without his signature. So let's create a literal line for him to sign his name, then use this incredible Blambot font called Whitechapel for something that looks like a realistic dip pen signature. And now we have a block of text that is begging for something equally fancy to contain it. This certainly isn't the time for a boring round balloon. So let's create an actual weathered, yellowed piece of paper, with angles to indicate that it might have been folded and transported across great distances to be signed and notarized. And just because I love a good cliché, let's create a series of chips and dings around the edges, giving it the character of a weathered Victorian artifact. Now, remember that vintage nib dipped in blood? Of course, that means that some of the writing in our evil business contract has to be in red. Along with these lines, which actually are a direct tribute to the red ruling in old 19th century documents. One subtle thing we can do is shift the type from pure black to a dark brown. It's a small thing, but it greatly adds to your perception of an old document with natural ink that's faded slightly. And now for the ultimate final touch, a red wax seal, embossed with the pointy teeth of the Evil Business Guild. Or so I imagine. The seal really is the piece that ties this all together. And so we now have our most elaborate, unhinged version of evil business vampire lettering. Comic lettering as art, existing as a singular image that you could hang in a gallery. But, as many in the comments always point out, it's probably too elaborate for constant use across an entire comic. So let's begin to deconstruct it to find potential alternative systems. We've gone to one extreme, the most ornamental, impractical version of lettering. Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum and re-letter his dialogue with the basics. When lettering a comic, my general purpose font is, in my opinion, the best digital comic lettering typeface ever created. Blambot's tough as nails. Even inside basic white speech balloons, it has a ton of pulpy character that matches the tone of our stories. But I do think it lacks some of the character we found with our Victorian contract design. So first things first, let's try a color shift and borrow our aged paper look with dark brown type and strokes. Now we've got a better, more defined look that would work across any scene on top of any panel art. But I do think that his voice could feel more refined, and I'd like to somehow combine the elegance of handwriting and the formality of blackletter without having to switch between typefaces for an entire story. And after much searching, Blambot has the answer once again. Meet Eurocomic, a brilliant font that feels angular and yet handwritten, with wedge-shaped marks that feel reminiscent of some of the tapering flourishes in the handwritten script, but with sharp corners like our blackletter font. It really is the best of all worlds, and it adds a ton of character to his voice without sacrificing legibility. And honestly, I might not have thought to use it without first exploring the more complex typefaces and everything that they have to offer. Again, we could stop here and have an incredible, consistent lettering system. But if you're hungry for even more character, we can borrow those weathered chips and pockmarks from our maximalist version and apply them to the edges of the round balloons. If it's too difficult to abandon the fun of switching typefaces mid-monologue, we can accentuate a word or two with our original typefaces, provided you use them sparingly. And just because I can't abandon this fun little wax seal, we could even shrink it down and stick a mini version half on, half off the bottom of the final balloon in a sequence. It's almost too much, but it's fun and might be the perfect way to end the final sentence on the final page of a story. So now, by following our two-step process of speculative maximalism and refined reduction, we've created 5 different looks for our evil business vampire. Most of them are flexible enough to work for page after page after page, over any setting or scene, without becoming tiresome for the reader. But honestly, there's no reason to throw away all of our original design work completely. This original version might actually be perfect for a single opening splash page, akin to old EC comics, when the Crypt Keeper or the Old Witch would set the stage, breaking the fourth wall and warning the reader about what was in store. If I opened a book and this was the first thing I saw, it certainly would pique my interest enough to continue reading. Okay, I know what you're thinking. What about those icicle ties? How would that look on this drawing? Well, because I can read your mind and knew you'd ask, I tried it. I even bent the big tie to create a weird angular tail for the balloon. And honestly, I find it even worse on top of actual artwork. As I predicted, the highly illustrated balloon fights the highly detailed drawing and comes across as garish and unrefined. But that's just me, and one creator's garish might be another's treasure, so no judgment if you still like it. But if you want to use it, maybe treat this as another maximalist version and see what simpler systems you can distill from it. But that's it. That's the most detailed lettering video we've ever released. Hopefully it helped you understand the nuances of designing a lettering system, and hopefully it will help you consume our lettering content in the future. The next time you see me working in the gray void, imagine how the elaborate lettering could be simplified for a real comic, and imagine all kinds of context and art underneath those balloons. And as always, if you enjoyed this video or have learned any helpful tips about comic creation from us, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. For $5 a month, you can support us directly and unlock all kinds of rewards related to every part of comic creation, from inking to coloring to lettering.